Hey everyone, welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Ray Christner, and with me,
Paul Wagner.
And today I really feel we did get to talk with an expert in the field. It was a great conversation with Dr. Charles Barrett.
Yeah. And, the topic being empowering children. And, I think from the get-go, we can hear that drive and that desire that he has to empower children. The way he talks about it, he really takes that, the insight of the field and applies it so well when he's working with kids, and he brings an energy about it. So it comes across in leaps and bounds.
Yeah. So, he's definitely kind of a fun guy to chat with. And really, like, when people get to read about him, you're going to see he's into a whole bunch of things. He writes, he teaches, he's a musician, he's a psychologist. Like he's got his hand into a whole bunch of things. And you can kind of get that passion and purpose that he has in his life kind of comes through. And it was great. My introduction to him actually was just happened to be on LinkedIn, and just something where, friend of a friend. So we kind of connected and just started seeing what he posted, and definitely was a guy that had the energy I'm glad we got to bring on here. So, for those that don't know who Charles Barrett is, he's a school psychologist, or actually is the coordinator of psychological services at Loudoun County Public Schools in Virginia. But he also is well known in the field of school psychology and has been kind of all over the country presenting, and again, has a number of books. So check those things out. So for Paul, what's your takeaways today?
I have a list of quotes that, I think each one of them could be a takeaway. But if I had to narrow it down to one, that, there's something that he shares, and he's talking about the importance of not just viewing children as this, island, and just, kind of taking them out of the context of their environment. And he's talking about, these different systems, but one that he noted is culture. And he really expanded it. He says, culture isn't just about, heritage or, language, any of these things. Culture is about their experience. And wow, that just hit home. And, as I'm reflecting back, it's, I absolutely see that application piece, but, just a great takeaway from the episode. How about for you, Ray? What stood out?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of be a little secretive today. So because I don't want to kind of ruin his comment, I'm just going to kind of tell you where in the episode. So for me, it was at the end when we started asking about, what keeps him psyched. And we asked him about giving one thing that people should watch or be aware of. And he mentions a movie, and it is probably the best summary of that movie that I've gotten in just a couple words. And as he was talking, it changed the way I've thought about this movie that I've seen 100 times. But wow, how somebody's words can make you view that in a different way. So I'm going to leave it for you all to experience, but listen to the end when he's talking about his takeaways and his quote about the movie.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this Masters in Practice episode, Empowering Children.
Thank you, Charles. Welcome to joining us on the Psyched to Practice podcast. We're so excited to have you join us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So I've been telling Paul about you. So, we've never met before today, but I've, kind of become a LinkedIn fan of yours. So, if I'm over liking your posts or something, don't get freaked out. But
all right. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's so, what intrigued me about you was, you kind of put this positive energy out, talking about kids a lot different than I hear other people talk about kids and the value of spending time with them. And so I always look forward to seeing what you're going to put on there. And I was like, wow, we just have to have a discussion with this guy about kind of what he's doing and, the difference that you make in kids' lives and really hearing about how they make a difference in your life, which I think is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Love children. So grateful that my positive energy resonates with you and others out there. So I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I guess to start out here, before we kind of dive into the topic, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about kind of how you got into the world of mental health and school psychology. What led you on this path?
Yeah. So, wow. So like many school psychologists, I stumbled upon school psychology in college. I was a senior in college, never heard of school psychology. And I went in as an English and speech pathology major. I was going to be either a high school English teacher or be a speech pathologist. One of the things that I talk about a lot the last probably 2 years or so is being a person not only that used to stutter, in elementary school, but having a lifelong stutter. I've accepted that probably the last 2 years, and it's been a major just part of who I am and my development. So go to college, English major, always enjoyed writing. But I say, I want to be a speech pathologist to really help kids like me. I was in speech therapy for 6 years, first through sixth grades, in my hometown of Freeport, New York. So get to college and that's great. But for like many people, money was a problem for my family. I have 4 brothers and my parents said, we don't have it. So we got to figure something out to get you guys through school. So a friend of mine that I knew just kind of at the same church, she was a program director or program coordinator for a program that was designed to get minority students into the sciences. So research, typically biology and chemistry and physics, which was not my thing at all, or sociology or psychology. So I had briefly thought about psychology, just kind of crossed my mind. It was a great scholarship. It was a full ride. They pay for summer classes, give you a stipend. So I told folks I made going to school. So I ended up dropping my speech major, took up psychology, and I had to get an undergrad research mentor. That was Raymond DiGiuseppe, just legendary guy in the field, clinical psychologist, school psychologist, child psychologist. And just working with him, I went to college in the late 90s. And about a year after Columbine happened, and he was looking at like aggression in adolescence and things like that. Really cool stuff. By the end of undergrad, I was intrigued by psychology, and I was torn between, do I still become a teacher, maybe a principal or superintendent one day, or pursue child psychology. And I remember talking to Dr. DiGiuseppe. I told him that. So what do I do? And he said, well, what do you like? What do you want to do? I said, well, I like kids. I like schools. And I always say in 5 minutes, he changed my life. He told me about school psychology. I'd never heard of it before. And I liked him. I trusted him. He was one. And that's how I got into school psychology. So that was probably probably like spring of 2001 or so. Didn't know where to apply. So I kind of Googled NAS and all these things. I remember being in my first semester of grad school, having this learning curve that was tremendous. I took no undergrad ed courses. So learning about IEPs and IDEA, it was like, what is this stuff? So that was my entryway into school psychology. Now I'm 16 years in the field. I practiced for 13 years as a school-based practitioner, elementary all 13, did high school for 9, middle school for 6. And the last 3 years, I've been a coordinator. So I'm supporting psychs now, about 65 or so psychs and interns. But that was how I stumbled upon school psych, through Ray DiGiuseppe. But going into it, knowing that I wanted to work with kids and I wanted to work in schools, that was kind of my process. That was my path.
Yeah. So a great mentor. I actually just saw Dr. DiGiuseppe at a conference just a couple weeks ago. So,
really?
It's a small world in psychology, man.
For sure.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of your some of your work today, and one of the things I think we're going to talk about specifically is about a book that you did called "It's Always About the Children," and I guess maybe tell us a little bit about what inspired that book. I know you've written a lot of other things, but what got you to that book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember being at the time I was I think a co-chair of one of the NAS committees, and we were sitting around, probably April or so was our meeting, and people were talking about their summer plans. Like, what are you planning for the summer? It's coming around the corner. And I remember sitting in that meeting and telling them I'm going to write a book this summer. And I had just kind of toyed around with this idea around giving people a window into how I think and practice as a school psychologist. And I wrote the book not only for school psychs or grad students in school psych programs, but for all educators, so for teachers and school counselors and principals and speech pathologists, really giving them a sense of who I am and how I think, how I approach serving students and families and schools as a school psychologist. I would say the heart of the book is chapter 2 that talks about things that were not taught in school, at least explicitly, but nonetheless have a larger impact than these clinical skills. So we're not taught always how to connect to people or how to serve people, or how to kind of become a part of a school culture and a part of the community. But I've learned that those behaviors or those actions really go a long way, sometimes a longer way than the assessment skills or the report writing and the counseling and consultation. So that was it. It was a really short, I kind of wrote itself. I had a couple of articles I'd written before and pulled for some things, but just some stories about my experiences. And I wanted to give people a sense of who I am and how I approach school psychology. So that was about 5 years ago now. And it's done great. You know, grad programs use it, teachers use it, schools have adopted it. So I'm grateful for that.
And, Charles, something that as I was reading through the, some of the excerpts that you had sent us, the importance just of that, like of forming connections and, if the way that the book read, it was very, very much like this narrative storytelling, but it was informative, but exactly what you're saying, not necessarily of the clinical skills, but rather of how do we turn those clinical skills into something that can be applicable. And it's really this application idea of forming connections with the children, with the students, and really trying to empower them. And so, that was a word that kept circling around. Is like, how do we promote children? How do we empower children? And, would you mind just kind of like maybe summarizing a few of those key points that you think like, what are some of the most important or valuable ways that we as clinicians can do that?
Yeah, so I think the title really speaks for itself. I believe that when we keep kids at the center of what we're doing, a lot of the other things, they don't go away immediately, but they at least keep us focused on what matters and what's most important. So when I think of empowering children, one of the things that I really believe in is listen to the children. I posted actually last night, we're recording this now, but about just the time that we take to ask them questions, but really listen to what they have to say. And there's such wisdom in just listening to a kid in kindergarten, in second grade, third grade. They have so much innocence, but how they phrase things, how they frame things. I would say being intentional about listening to what the kid has to say is so important. And we talk about being child-centered and all these things, and I think we mean it, but it does take time and it does take intentionality. So I would say that's the first thing, is listening to what the kid has to say. The other thing I think is, and this I learned long before school psych, just from my own mentors in life, as a musician growing up in church and people that I've played with, I've learned that good connection is just following what the person is excited about. So we talk about kids, something motivates everyone, or everyone is motivated by something. And I would say sometimes the kid won't tell you, I love lacrosse, or I love playing piano, or I love acting or drama or music. But when we not only listen to what they say, but watch what they do. And when are they most alive? That's another kind of key that I've learned. What drives this person? What motivates them? So when they're talking to me about their soccer game or their new video game or their new brother or sister or whomever, then I know what really resonates with them when they really become excited about things. So listening to them, but also just watching, how do they respond to people? I've also learned, in my career that kids have a way of knowing if you like them or not, just by how you move around them, how you say their name, how you, just the energy, the vibe you put off, when you're around them. So, just being in tune to what children do, I think can teach us a lot. That's why I spend time at the car line and in the cafeteria and in the hallways, because I'm getting so much just good clinical information from being around them. So yeah, listen to them, but also look for when are they most alive. And that gives us a lot of clues about empowering them and encouraging them in those directions.
I love that line. Look for when they're most alive. And, certainly I can think in the therapy office setting, like when a kiddo is excited to share something and like there's a different energy than, certainly when we're talking about the other day-to-day, just life stressors or things that are going on, but just the tone that they can, maybe even like all the verbals, the paraverbals, the nonverbals, they just all align so well. And you can certainly just tell a difference there.
Exactly right. You can feel it. And those are things that are very organic. Someone told me that when I talk about certain things, they see my excitement. I don't really see it because I'm not looking at myself or hear it. But they said, no, it's clear, Charles, when you talk about certain things, that's what you do. So I think the same thing for kids. When they're alive, when they're excited and motivated, that's what we need to tap into and really encourage them in those directions as they mature and grow.
Well, and we're talking about this idea of, empowering and promoting. And I think, clinicians, especially clinicians that are working with children, that there's a passion there, but at times it might fall short or it might miss the mark. And so, what do you think are some of maybe the common pitfalls that clinicians might stumble into that it creates a barrier from them connecting in this way?
So I want to take a line from my good friend, Dr. Byron McClure, and he says something that is so powerful. He said, we have to shift from what's wrong with kids to what's strong about them. So he has this whole kind of getting away from deficit thinking. And I think one of the things that even school psych has been kind of known for historically is that our job is to identify disabilities, kind of the things that are weaker with children. And I think too many times we go in looking for a problem, and that blinds us from the strengths that all kids have. So I think one of the things that we have to, again, it takes some intentionality because that's not how the field has been kind of crafted or developed, is how do I find what's strong about this kid in some way? One of the things that really bothers me, I would say, is that if I ask a teacher or parent, a guardian, what are your child's strengths or what are your students' strengths? And they struggle to come up with one. That bothers me because every kid has something that's strong that an adult in their life should be able to identify quickly. So I would say overlooking the kid's strengths at the expense of identifying deficits, weaknesses is a major pitfall. I think another one is looking at the child in isolation of their ecological system. If I knew that I would talk about Bronfenbrenner every day in my career, I would have put more attention in my grad school course about that theory just makes so much sense for life, but for school psychology, for what I do a lot of around social justice and equity work, is we have to understand kids in the context of these overlapping and intersecting systems that they grow up in, so their family, their neighborhood, their school, their faith group, their community, all those things. So when we look at kids separate from the environment that they're being raised in, that's also a pitfall because we're not understanding them kind of in totality. So those are just two things that come to mind, overlooking their strengths, but also overlooking what's happening around them that might be sometimes more informative than what's happening within them only.
When I hear you say that, and kind of when you were talking about just kind of those things like listening to kids and watching kids, we talk a lot about this with, building therapy relationships. And I think sometimes clinicians get stuck in the theories that they were taught and they forget about the human that's in front of them, and it's, so we sit there and we're trying to actively listen and we're doing all these techniques. And sometimes it's just about being face to face with somebody and having a conversation and going, hey, if your strength is playing Minecraft and you can rock Minecraft, it's still a strength and it requires a lot of skills to do that. And how do we understand that and play off of that to make their lives better? And, we've had some past episodes about talking about, using pop culture in therapy and things of that nature, just for that reason. Like, I think, I had a mentor that said something similar to what you said that your friend Byron has brought up, but he was like, I don't care if you give an IQ test and all these tests and the scores are all in the 50s. Tell me about what the kid can do. Tell me about what their strengths are. And if we do that, we're going to have success with the kid. Like we're going to make some progress. So when you're talking about, I love that. It brought back a lot of kind of memories of some of my mentors when you were saying these things. Yeah, it's great.
That's good stuff. That's great. Yeah. Every kid can do something. One of my core values, I would say, is that every single person has a gift. Now, the problem is in schools, I think we have a narrow framing of what gifts are. It's like IQ, it's academic achievement, all these things. But we have to, I think a central role that adults, but especially adults in schools can play is helping kids identify what their gift is. What do you do well naturally with almost no practice or no preparation, but it's just this innate ability to do this well. Help the kid identify that. And that leads to true fulfillment, true success, just, feeling whole in themselves.
So I don't want to put you on the spot here, but you're kind of, you're a storyteller because I've read your stories online. So tell us about a kid that surprised you, that you found something in them that you were like, gosh, this is a great strength that sometimes those are the ones that are most saying, what's one that comes to mind for you? Like what's one that resonates?
So early in my career, probably my first or second year, I was at a high school, and most of the kids in that high school were from Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. And a lot of them would immigrate to the States. And this kid was, I think, 15 years old. And a lot of them might have had either no schooling formally in their native country or, a couple years here, then they didn't go a lot. And so they get here and they're 15. We said, well, 15, you belong in 10th grade. And they're not doing well. They're not meeting, benchmarks and passing these state tests and all these things. So, someone recommends testing the kid for disability. So test the kid, and he scored cognitively like in the low to mid 80s. So he had some decent ability, but achievement wise, like in the deficient range, 40s, 50s. And what we learned was that he was basically doing the math or reading until he was taught. So he went to school between 4th grade and now 10th grade. But this child had such a work ethic. He might have had 2 jobs at the time, I think at a pizzeria or somewhere else, but he wanted to do something to support himself, support his family. But the question that I asked him on the WJ or some nonverbal or KBC was not tapping into those strengths, that motivation, some would say grit, but that desire to do better and to have more than I had, in Honduras, Guatemala, wherever, he came from. So that's one. And then there's another kid, similar story that, again, tested, didn't qualify because the kid was not disabled, but was struggling with English and all these things that we had. But he did great work in auto body. He had a job at a collision, company. And I always wonder about those two guys. This is over probably 10, 12 years ago and where they are now, because one of the things that I think we didn't do well is prepare them for life. We had this system of, you go to high school, you go to community college, you go to college, you get a job, but we didn't do well at preparing them with skills to, support themselves, so classes in entrepreneurship or giving him more auto body and collision and, how to start a business, how to balance a checkbook. Those are things that they could do and truly would excel. I got one more for you. Let me tell you one more. So this, now that I'm talking, it all kind of coming back to me. This kid was identified with autism years ago in middle school. But even back in middle school, his thing was lawn care. And he was all about John Deere and all the John Deere products. He had like riding mowers. And even in middle school, he had these major jobs cutting people's grass, like, acres of land. And he would have his headphones on. He came out and cut my grass one time, and just loved the cutting grass and lawn care. Came with a friend of his at the time to cut my grass. He said, do a good job for this guy, so I'm watching you. But very motivated in school, didn't want to read, didn't want to follow rules, but he was all about his John Deere and his business. Right. So many kids that come to mind that had these interests, had these skills, had these gifts, that if we gave them the tools, they could really, really excel. So again, maybe not success in the eyes of a school district in terms of, pass rates on state tests and grades, but they were achieving in their own ways. Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because I think that also is, how do we use that for success? Right. I mean, it's funny. You're talking about the first guy you were talking about. I just had a kid I just did an evaluation on who's just not doing well in school. He's 18, senior. They don't know what he's going to do. Not really motivated at school. Talking to him, this guy every night before he goes to bed at night, goes to a pizza shop, makes dough, gets it ready, lets it rise, goes home and sleeps, gets up in the morning before school, goes and bakes 200 rolls a day for this pizzeria, has them ready, gets cleaned up, goes to school, spends the school day and goes through things. And when I told the school, I'm like, this kid, he's like the main baker for this whole shop. And they were shocked by it, and he's in a school that doesn't have a culinary program. It's limited, but I'm like, man, how do we use that? Because that's not a lazy kid, right? That's right. That's exactly. Yeah. Right. So those work ethic things I think are great.
Yeah. And that's just a perfect example of looking at just kind of the kids' whole world, their whole system ecologically that the school knows nothing about, but you having that insight can be very informative about how they engage him, how they motivate him to do certain things, or just understanding who he is more than his grades or, lack of interest or whatever he might be showing in school.
Yeah, it was funny. I told the math teacher, I said, you said he couldn't do math, but I sat there and said, hey, what happens if they want you to only bake 150 rolls? How do you figure that out? And he's like, oh yeah, we do that on Mondays because it's a slow day. He said, and he could calculate the measurements of all of those things. He could just sit there and do them in his head, but he's not passing math class. So it's that strength focus is great.
It's huge. Good stuff. I love that.
And so often I find that if we can almost use those strengths, use those interests or passions to try to inform and understand maybe some of the concerns of why we're seeing these kids. And so, I'll have parents come in like, oh, well, he's not doing his homework, or, she's struggling with she wants to skip school. And so they're, again, that deficit focus. and talking about all the problems. And if we're just taking that approach alone and we're just viewing all of the, what's wrong with this kid, then, we're just another person telling them what they're lacking. But if we can, if we can talk with them and, it's the best, I would say the best outcomes that I have when working with kids or young adults is asking, like, what do you want out of this? Like, you're here, and if it's, getting your parents off your back, or if it's, I just want to like have some free time at the end of my day so that way I can play video games, or so I can go play sports with my friend, like whatever that, whatever brings them to life. If we can put that in line with some of these other requests or things that are going on in their life to help build resilience for them and tapping into some of that motivation. Like I find that it's not, it's not perfect. We don't make the things they don't like all of a sudden they like them, but now they're able to see them in a perspective that aligns with something that they do enjoy, that they do have a buy-in with. And now all of a sudden it's like, all right, it's worthwhile to either transition some of these skills or putting forth this effort in this way to get this outcome. And, then they're seeing this progress for themselves. So, that piece is such a crucial piece. And if we're only listening to the deficits, we're missing out on what the kid's bringing in and, really what drives them. Absolutely.
Exactly right. One quick story. So I went to, St. John's in New York as an undergrad, Catholic school. So we all had to take philosophy classes. I think it was 3 philosophy, 3 religion, and 1 more of either of them. So I took a class in Hinduism, knew nothing about it, not my background. And I struggled in that class the entire semester, just could not understand this whole different system of thinking. I remember talking to the professor one day, like, how can I do better, basically? And she said something to me, this is over 20 years ago, that I never forgot. She said to me, Charles, you can't bring your monotheistic point of view to Hinduism. And I didn't like it then, but I don't like it even more now. So when you were talking, Paul, I was thinking about this concept that we thought, we have in schools about culturally responsive teaching. And we think that that's only about like language and race, ethnicity. But culture to me is so much broader than that. It's experiences. It's what have you done? What have you, lived, and all these things. And what I know now is that what the teacher did not do was leverage what I did know about religion or faith in my own background and use that as a launching point to help me access the curriculum in Hinduism. So essentially she blamed me. Well, Charles, you're not thinking, well enough or differently enough to understand this. It's your problem, rather than how do I leverage what he has experienced, gone through, to make this content meaningful to him? So I think when teachers or staff, school psychologists understand who their students are, then we can make anything accessible or meaningful. So Ray, back to your story about the lead baker. If we understood that about him, how do we make math more exciting? Use some baking examples that you might understand, and learn how to convert things or do algebra, whatever. So that's the work of education. Is really, how do I understand who I'm trying to teach to make what I'm teaching meaningful and accessible to them. And
there's a word that, like, when we're talking about, like, or when I'm talking about these ideas in a session, I try to talk to kids about how do we translate this? So how do we translate this from something that we don't understand into something that we can? And so whether it's, oh, hey, I lost video games, and, because I wasn't doing my homework, and, I'll talk to the kids like, hey, like, so how do you think your mom feels about you playing video games? She's like, oh, well, she hates me playing video games. Like, well, here, let's listen in. Like, let's translate what mom is saying, because honestly, I think mom would be ecstatic for you to get video games, but it has to be in alignment with also these other goals. And so, all of a sudden it's not this butting of heads of mom doesn't like video games. She doesn't want me playing to, oh, mom wants to encourage me to play video games, but we have to encourage it in this certain way. And if we can translate that for them, Now, all of a sudden, it's not a fight and an argument, but rather now, how do we both work together in this shared goal? We both want you to play video games. How do we get there?
Exactly right. Love it. Yeah. Love it.
And you shared that, talking about just the systems in their life. And I love that culture is an experience idea. And, in one of the chapters of the book, you were talking about the importance of consultation with, beyond just, the teacher, beyond just the student themselves. And, kind of earlier on, this idea of a student being almost an island and, we're only focusing on them outside of their environment. And, Charles, what are the different systems that you think are so important when working with a child, whether, as a school psychologist, what are those systems that you want to make sure you're looking at to have this fuller picture? And even if it's outside of the school system, what are the important pieces that you would encourage clinicians to look for?
Yeah, hands down, the family. Yeah. Got to start there. Who does the kid live with? Who is their family? What does family look like? And beyond that, what does the family value? That to me is huge in practice. I think that ultimately we all want the same thing for the kid. We have different ways of getting there. So in grad school, my research was looking at ADHD assessment between Black and white boys using Black and white moms as the informants. And what I found was actually surprising in the sense of, basically I had Black and white moms watch a video of a Black child or a white child. So I had these 4 different combinations, and then they rated them on, a scale for ADHD. And what I found was that the Black mothers rated everybody higher as far as more indicative of being inattentive and hyperactive impulsive compared to white moms. So the Black boy got high ratings from the Black mom and the white boy. And I was not expecting that because culturally, I have experienced more Black families, Black moms, Black dads being more resistant to the idea of ADHD. But now with their own ratings, they're saying, yeah, this kid is, more hyperactive, impulsive, more inattentive. What we did not ask, I did this with my supervisor, George DuPaul up at Lehigh. And what we did not ask was, what do these ratings mean to you? In other words, just from my experience in the field, I have seen high ratings from Black moms, Black dads about, various behaviors, but that high rating doesn't equate to, and the child has ADHD, or and the child is disabled, and the child needs whatever. It's just, it's who they are. And it doesn't bother me. It's not a problem. Whereas in other cultures, the high T-score equals, and they have a disorder, and they need medication, and they need treatment, and all these things. So we can see kind of similar ratings or scores or things, but they have a totally different value system or interpretation of what those numbers or scores mean. So understanding what the family values and how that plays into what the child does. One of the things that we've learned, again, in school-based practice is that our language is so important. So we've used things like expected behavior at school versus expected behavior at home. When that doesn't devalue anyone's behavior, so when you're at school, you do it this way. At home, you do it that way. So we're still kind of respecting the different, cultures of school and community and home, but also teaching what we might want the kid to do, in this setting. So I would say the system of the family is a huge one, but I also think about the system of the community, especially in these days, since the pandemic, when school literally became home and home became school with virtual learning, all the things that kids were exposed to on social media and just kind of in the country, all the turmoil going on different ways. I think we have to understand, again, where is this kid growing up? In what kind of community? Is there community violence? Is there trauma that they've been exposed to that they can't escape? So I think about kids who've been exposed to police violence in different ways and living in Baltimore, in Minneapolis, or other places where there's been, instances of police violence against certain communities. So I think that's another major one that we often don't think about because the kid brings all that trauma to school. And it looks like ED, it looks like ADHD. It's just unresolved trauma that has not been treated effectively. So family is a huge one, community. Then in school, I think one of our biggest systems that, again, we talk about maybe not sometimes, is this tier 1 system of what do all kids get? Kind of this universal instruction, be it for academics to RTI or behavior at PBIS and SEL. But what do we give all kids universally? And how effective is that for your various school districts or your school building? Because it's not going to be the same. What might work well, for your school, Paul, or your school, Ray, might not work well at my school as a tier 1 strategy. So I think about tier 1 being one of the most untapped kind of systems that we don't really think about. And we try to kind of, tier 2 our way through this thing. It's like, no, let's kind of focus on what are we doing for all kids fundamentally, and then go from there. So just some quick ideas: family, of course, and what they value, the community in which kids are living, but certainly the tier 1 system of schools is also a very important one.
Yeah, and when you're talking about those, I'm hung back on your word or your phrase, culture is experience. Because if we think about all of the experiences they have in their community and their home, that's where it becomes important. You were talking about the ADHD thing, and one of the things, when I don't teach full time anymore, but when I was teaching at a university level, I always used to tell people the scores don't matter unless you ask questions about what those scores mean to the family. Like if you don't sit down, if you don't sit down with that rating scale afterward and say, hey, this is what was high. What does that mean to you? Like how do you see that within your family, or, how does that look? And I find for a lot of times what we've labeled a rating scale as isn't always indicative of how the parents perceive it. And I would even go a step further. I think we have to do that with teachers as well. I think, what teachers rate, and then when I sit down with them and say, well, this one was high, like tell me what you think about that. And they'll go, oh no, like I don't think the child was depressed. Like I don't know why that's high. Okay, well, what do you think? Like let's talk this through. Then you get that real experience. Then numbers can match with the experience. And I think that's when we're better at intervention. So I love how you kind of frame it, because it really, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, like that's what we need to do. Like tests don't help kids. Tests just guide us in a direction that we can ask further questions to help kids. So
exactly.
Yeah. So love that idea. Yeah.
And in those various areas that you were identifying, Charles, that are important to look beyond just the child themselves, I'm wondering the roles that technology has. And so, so often, I'll talk to kids and it's video games or it's TikTok or YouTube, and trying to familiarize myself with certain things. And, I as a kid, I grew up with video games. So that was something that I can pretty quickly connect with. And, that I certainly can tell a difference when I'm talking with a kid and he's really, really upset. And I'm asking the parent, like, well, hey, like, what's going on? And they're saying like, oh, well, something happened in his game. And like, they're just like very dismissive of that. And, I'm like, okay, well, hey, like, parent like walks out. I'm like, hey, so like, when mom and dad said something happened in the game, walk me through it. And like, well, I'm in Roblox and I'm in Adopt Me and I have this ultra rare pet. And then someone came in and they scammed me. And because, my stepdaughter kind of got me into it, but I have some experience, I've played that game with her. I've kind of gone through that. And then so that I have a different context and understanding for that. So, that where it's just a problem in a game for a parent, it's something that because of that exposure to that environment, this virtual environment, now I can see like, oh, you've worked really hard to get this. Like you put in time, you had to like, there's a lot of effort. There's a lot of planning that went in. And then someone came and took that away, and so that would be the same if, oh, someone broke into my house and stole something. Like that's the feeling that they get, but they don't have that language and a parent doesn't see that. And so when they're having this strong reaction, it's like, whoa, it's just a game. but to them it's not. And being able to have that connectedness as well. So I think the consultation also with technology is so valuable because it's just a part of our lives now. And making sure that that's a piece of it as well.
It is. I would say that for me, I mean, I played Atari and Nintendo growing up, all these things. I wasn't like into it too much. My brothers were, but I did a little bit. But one thing that I do understand about kids when I meet young musicians and they're playing and that's all they want to do. I don't want to read. I don't want to do, I want to play. And I get that because I was a kid who enjoyed playing. And it's not just for, musicians, but I find it with any artist, you invest yourself in this thing. So if you're a painter, if you're a dancer, and I understand that personality very well. Yeah. So it is kind of in their mood, like, they're just passionate about playing. If I miss one note, one chord, the whole song was just terrible. And that's how they see it. So to your point, Paul, about, I did all this practice and all this time to get to this level. And I say, I can't play anymore. That's like, it robs me of how I invested myself in this activity that I care about. But mom and dad said, well, that's just a video game. That's nothing. That's not how they see it. And that's why we need people that understand kids in different ways, but also people that have varied experiences too, that bring that to the field. I always talk about, bringing your whole self to the profession of what you do as a teacher, school psych. So all of us were doing things before psychology. You were an athlete, you were, playing video games, you're a musician, those things are still relevant because you use that to talk to the kids. So don't forget about that football game and the wrestling match and all these things because that comes in handy.
And, I don't know that this was necessarily the intended application, but I hear it here. And, the moment I read this quote in your book, I wrote it down. Like I was like, I wanted to ask you about it. And it's, while passion is necessary for personal and professional fulfillment, it's not sufficient. Passion must be informed by purpose. Mm-hmm. And here I almost hear taking the passion and applying and being able to take it and applying it. And, that purpose, one of the things that drew me into the field is I want to help. And so taking that and being able to apply it in that way. And, when you were writing that, I'm left wondering, what stands out for you? Like, how can clinicians really try to cultivate this and expanding on this idea of purpose and passion interconnecting?
Yeah. So probably another one of my really, my core values is we got to have purpose.
Yeah.
Not have purpose. Well, because we all have purpose too. Like we all have a gift. We have to know what that purpose is. That's it. Know what your purpose is and really let that be your North Star. So for me, purpose is more than the profession. It's more than school psych. It's more than kids. My purpose is hope and wholeness. So whatever I'm doing, teaching, writing, music, school psyching, it's all about communicating hope and wholeness to people. And if I'm not doing that, I'm not fulfilled. So I tell my students, I tell, people across the country, you gotta know why you are doing this. Because I love school psychology, there are some not so good days. This is, reports to write and just stuff. But when you're guided by this sense of purpose that I am doing what I need to be doing at this time of my life, it really makes all the difference. So, again, more than what you are doing, but why are you doing it? Right now, I'm a school psychologist and I'll always be one in some way, but at some point I won't be practicing with the school system, but my purpose, which is hope and wholeness, will always be there. And I'll find another vehicle, another mechanism to communicate that to people. But that is such a foundational principle. We have got to also identify what is my purpose for doing this. And then when you find that, it makes all the other things fall in line. And having that sense of purpose is just, it's the best feeling. It really is encouraging to you as a person as well.
So I'm curious, how do you facilitate that in kids? Because I love that when you're saying your purpose, it doesn't matter if you're a school psychologist or what the next part of your career, there's this kind of theme that rolls through your life. And, so we've talked about a couple kids. We've had some examples of, kids that you mentioned, some kids I mentioned, and they have a purpose. And I think where we falter in all systems of care for kids, schools, clinically, whatever, is that we don't facilitate that theme through their life. So how can we get somebody who's passionate and practices like crazy on Minecraft to be the best Minecrafter, to have half of that energy to practice at school? Like, so what's your thoughts on that? How do you help facilitate that purpose for kids?
So I would say it's back to the whole shifting from what's wrong to what's strong and showing them how these skills are transferable to other things. So going back to school psych for a quick second, I'll come back to your question. I tell my students that you're not getting just a degree in school psychology, your MA CAGS or your EDS or your PsyD PhD. You're learning a set of skills that are transferable to life. So you might come out of here and practice for 50 years or 35 years or 2 minutes. Doesn't matter. You do what you're driven to do, but you'll always take the critical thinking, the data analysis, the consultation, all of that you'll take to whatever you're doing in life. So I think one of the things that I try to do, and maybe not perfectly like anyone else, is I try to see, what does this kid really enjoy doing? What are they good at? And show them how your consistency in practicing Minecraft, if you bring that same level of consistency to math or to spelling or to history, you'll improve like you did in Minecraft. Or if you take your same drive for playing piano and practicing football, take that same energy and apply it to reading and whatever else you're doing in school, and you'll see the results pay off for you. But while I do that, I try to also, of course, reinforce them with what's meaningful right now. So I need 15 solid minutes of this worksheet, right? And then we can shoot some hoops in the gym, or we can take a walk around the school. Those are ways I think that we can leverage what is driving or motivating for the kid, but showing them how your skills in Minecraft are visual spatial skills, or your skills in that's problem solving, that's fluid reasoning. I mean, those are things that we can really talk about in a meaningful way for kids, but I don't think we always do that intuitively. But those things that I try to share with, with other staff. What does the kid like to do? Again, when are they most alive? How do we leverage that for our benefit and for their benefit, of course?
And, I think this blends so well. And another quote that from your book I had written down is, helping to teach children how to think rather than what to think. And, exactly that, like that application piece of it, and how to apply it well. And certainly hear that coming across.
Interns ask me on interviews, they say, what makes a good intern? And I have the same answer every year: the ability to think. You gotta learn. That's it. You can think critically. You can do this job, because the things that we give you in school in coursework are neat, black and white examples, and the kids, just ADHD or just LD. And in the real world, you might get one of those a year. That's a gift. But if you can think through all the limitations of standardized testing, all the things about instruction and motivation and school funding and family and this, and just kind of think through, where is the most consistency? What does this mean for the kid's life? You can do this job. So yeah, thinking is such a necessary skill. And I'm grateful for my own, K-12 education, that I was taught how to think. And I think that we can really do a lot of kids service, by teaching them not what to believe or what to think, but how do you make good decisions? How do you gather data and look at all the possibilities and land where you land? That's good teaching. That's good education.
So, Charles, this was great. I wish we had another hour that we could spend kind of chatting, just because, you're kind of ending my day on a good note, which I appreciate it. And so when we have guests on, we like to kind of wrap up with kind of our takeaways, and just to kind of hear from people kind of some things that kind of motivate them, or kind of gems they would give to people. So, first thing I always ask is, we're called the Psyched to Practice podcast. So we're interested in what keeps you psyched to do what you do.
Easy, kids. It's always children for me. I said earlier that the last 3 years I've been an administrator. So, I'm in my third year now. And most, admin, they work at a central office. And I don't do that. I work out of a school. There's something about the energy of schools that really motivates me. So being around kids every day, the kids that stop by and, say hi to you in the hallway, at the car line, in the cafeteria, that does something for me as a person, but it informs all of my work. When I can still read with a kid, they teach me so much. I got a post coming for you soon, Ray. But just these really, serendipitous occurrences, they really motivate me, inspire me, keep me connected, grounded. So that's something that is important to me, that keeps me motivated. If I'm not working around kids or with kids, I'm not happy. And I learned that in this role. And grateful that I have a job and a boss who's supportive of that. That I can still work out of a school building, but still do my thing as an administrator. So hands down, that's an easy one. Being around kids keeps me psyched.
Awesome. Now, this is kind of a hard one. So if you could recommend one piece of content, book, movie, TV show, podcast, music, I don't care. You could pick anything. For people in the profession, what's one thing you would suggest that they seek out?
This is hard because I have a couple things. This is going to be different. Okay. But if you follow me on social media, Instagram or Facebook, or even on LinkedIn, my favorite movie of all time is Home Alone. That is my favorite movie. I watch Home Alone as a middle-aged man in the middle of July and laugh like it's the first time I've seen it. Now we're in Home Alone season. So I watched it Thanksgiving night, like I always do. But Home Alone for me is such a powerful movie in so many ways. But what it talks about is the innocence of children, or it shows the innocence of children, but also the ingenuity of children. Kevin McAllister was 8 years old and defended his family's home against these two, robbers or burglars. But that movie to me just keeps me connected to what is so cool about kids. And even watching the first one and the second one, there are things that only children can do, and that's give you a chance. He gave the pigeon lady a chance, and he gave old man Marley a chance. When other people disregarded them, had these assumptions about them, Kevin McAllister sat and talked with them. And they talked to him too. They also listened to him and kind of saw him as who he was. So I would say you gotta watch Home Alone. That is just a phenomenal. I teach about pretty hard principles that I take things from Home Alone in my work. So yeah. Home Alone.
Well, I don't know if I'm ever going to watch it again without thinking of innocence and ingenuity. So I love that. That might stick with me for the rest of my life. I'm just going to because that is the perfect, you should have written the review to that movie when it came out, because that should have been in it. Love that. It's a great quote.
Thank you.
I actually just watched both of them over the past week. And so when you're talking about that, like the pigeon lady and him handing her the turtle dove, I'm like, yep.
That's good stuff, Paul. That's good stuff.
All right. Last kind of question we have before we wrap up. For our listeners, new clinicians out there, what are 3 gems that you've learned in your career that you think are of value to share with them?
All right. I'm going to give you a couple. One's from my grandmother. Grandma said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. We have to listen to people, validate them first, and then pivot to whatever we want to share as our idea or suggestion. So second one is from Kenny Rogers. Know when to hold them, know when to fold, know when to walk away. Sometimes as school-based clinicians, we are passionate about what we believe, and we could be right, but sometimes it's not worth the fight. So you say your piece and the team makes their decision and just kind of know when to hold and know when to fold. It just might not be worth the fight that day. So that, I think, comes with time and experience. But I tell folks, like, look, it's not worth it today. Just say your piece and move on. And the third one I would say is, we know kids, the word expert kind of bothers me, but for this, I'll say expert. We are experts in all children, but families are experts in their own children. So again, going back to that first one of listening twice as much as you speak, the family knows things about their kid that you'll never know. So valuing their input, their perspective. So grandma, listen twice as much as you speak. Kenny Rogers, know when to hold, know when to fold, and when to walk away and run sometimes too. But the third one, families are experts in their own children. Those are 3 I would leave with you.
Awesome. Well, Charles, it was just fantastic to talk to you tonight. Like I said, leaving me on a good place. I kind of, the only thing I regret is we didn't have a piano for you to play us out tonight, but that maybe next time. Next time.
Actually, so I always have one in the office. It's right over there.
You actually do have one. There we
go. And, just truly one more time, thank you, Charles. Like it has been a pleasure. And, it's between reframing Home Alone, just that I have quotes upon quotes written down, like, thank you for your time for today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And, you kind of mentioned a few of the social media pieces, but just as a whole, if there's any areas you want our listeners to check out or to keep up with with what's going on in your career or in your life, where would you like our audience to go to hear what's happening?
Yeah. Thank you. So charlesbarrett.org, www.charlesbarrett.org is a great place to start. Very active on social media. So at Charles A. Barrett for Instagram, at _Charles Barrett for Twitter or X. And then just you can type in Charles Barrett for LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm very active on those sites. And would love for you to engage and learn more about me. You can get my app, totally free app and totally anonymous. I don't know who has it, but if you type in Charles Barrett in Google Play or the App Store, totally free. And you can subscribe to get a morning message from me every day, 8 a.m. Eastern. So just something that I do to encourage people and motivate them, inspire them. So type in Charles Barrett. You can download it again, totally free, and then subscribe to Whole, and you can hear from me every morning at 8 o'clock.
I think you might have two new downloads here coming up soon.
I appreciate that.
And if you're interested in hearing more of what's going on for Psyched to Practice, you can visit our website at www.psychedtopractice.com or following us on all major social media. We'll be back next week. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.